Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I'm your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the book A Stolen Life by Jaycee Dugard. If you remember my last review, I said that this was an audiobook, as you can tell, and that if you remember in this latest became world news in 2009, when she was came back into the media. She was the girl that was kidnapped from her home in California in 1991, and had spent 18 years with her captor. And I found myself being very drawn to this story for some reason. I don't know if just because this was a girl that was my age, or this was a survival story, or it was just very interesting to me. And when I learned that she wrote a book, I really wanted to have it and to read it. And so, as I said before, I was looking all through the library for it, and they never had it because it was always popular, so everybody always checked it out. And so finally, last week they had the audiobook, and so I said, okay, that's good enough. And then I saw that it was read by her, and I said, whoa, okay, that's going to be interesting, because, but in my sense, you would probably, in this type of story, you probably wouldn't want any other person to tell the story, so you wouldn't want a character actor or anything doing that. So anyway, I'll get started. The book starts off with her at the very beginning. She described herself as, a typical 11-year-old back in 1991. And so she was born in 1980. And she lived with, at the time, she lived in Lake Tahoe, California, or near Tahoe. And she lived with her mother, her stepdad, whose name was Carl, and her half-sister, whose name was Shayna, who at the time, 1991, was 18 months old. So, and it starts off with her waking up on a very sunny June 10th morning, and she still was in school, so she woke up, and just a typical morning, she woke up, and one of the things that she realized was that her mother did not come in before she left for work to kiss her good morning, as Jaycee had asked her to do the night before. She had asked her mother, could you please come in and wake me up, or kiss me goodbye, and her mother just, I don't know if she just forgot or had too much on her mind and just forgot or what, but and so then she made her breakfast, made her lunch, and said goodbye to her. She started to try and say goodbye to her sister, but her sister was still sleeping, so she didn't want to wake her up. And she said goodbye to her stepdad. And through the beginning of the story, she talked about how she didn't really like her stepdad very much, and how he was mean to her, or she felt that he was mean to her, and favored his half-sister, who was his real daughter, that type of thing going on in step families. And so she's walking to school, or to her school bus, and what happens is she is stopped by a car, and the car pulls over and stops and starts to ask her for directions, and she might have answered them. She doesn't remember. It's not said what they asked her exactly, but then she felt this stinging sensation, kind of like an electrocution, and then she felt herself getting very weak and falling to the ground, and then being taken. She later tells that what she was actually hit with was a stun gun. And so that was kind of weird. When I first heard this, I thought it was more like a taser, but that's what it sounded like. But I'm sure those are kind of somewhat similar. Anyway, then she was taken by a man named Philip Garrido, who was the driver of the car, and then his wife, Nancy Garrido, who was his wife and the passenger in the car. So then she was taken and she was bound, and there was a blanket over her where she didn't know where she was going, and they drove for a long time, she said, and then they stopped finally and at the Garrido's house, and then she was then taken captive. And then I'm sorry, I wrote some notes. So what happened was she started to describe the first time that Philip had sexually abused her. This is very vulgar, if you can imagine, but she takes into great detail of what happened. I'm not going to give you any details here because, again, it is very vulgar. She uses explicit language, very sexual language. But even though I don't really approve of that language, of course, I don't use it in a normal, everyday conversation, but I applauded her for doing that. I don't really believe in censorship, so I loved that she was able to do that and was so brave enough to write down this sexual experience. And so she wasn't kept in their house. She was kept in what I understood it to be kind of a shed or a garage. It had multiple rooms. She was originally kept in just one room, handcuffed, and she just had a towel around her. She was naked underneath the towel for a very long time, and my only thought was, thank goodness that it was the summer in California, but I'm sure at night it got very cold. And there were towels over her windows that she had, so she really couldn't see outside. And Philip made it sound like there were Dobermans outside of her in their backyard, and he made it sound like if you make any noise, you're going to upset the Dobermans. Don't do that because they're very mean. And so she was very scared and very alone and helpless, and she and then she talks about the first time another time where he had abused her and ended up raping her. And the first time that she described it before, there really wasn't any sex involved, but this time there was, and again, very vulgar, very explicit. And so then it continues. She described the reason why Philip did this. He was telling her was that he had a sexual problem, and that was his release, and so she didn't understand that. She was 11, so she was very naive, and she didn't know hardly anything about sex and never understood what he wanted her to do, which again was very psychotic things and very, very adult things that you wouldn't want an 11-year-old to even experience. So, and then, so she's kept again for years, and she does see his wife a lot. He brings her a lot of food, and his wife also brings her a lot of food. And one of the things about Philip was that he already was a sexual predator, and he already was a sexual offender, so he was on parole a lot, and he broke his parole in the early 90s, so he was sent to jail for a long time. And so she was dealing with his wife, and so she wondered why his wife never helped her in any way, why she never set her free, and why his wife Nancy was letting her suffer that way. And Nancy never did anything sexual with her. It was always Philip. And but still she was very confused as to, he's gone, please help me. And she does, when she's 14, which is 3 years, she does become pregnant by Philip, and she carries it to term, and she delivers a baby girl. She never says her child's name, and then so she grows up with so she raises the child, and then kind of at the start of the first child is kind of when the sexual abuse lightens up. It doesn't end, but it does lighten up. Um, and there's 3 more years pass, and she ends up being pregnant again. So right now, Philip has fathered 2 of her children. Still very young. 17 is a very young age to even have one child rather than two. And so she is, so then she lives there along with her family, and she lives in different areas of this shed. Again, like I said, there's multiple rooms. She kind of volleys between one room and another room, and then they live in tents in the backyard. So and when she's older, Philip does start a printing business, and I think it's called Prints for Less. So she helps him do that. She's kind of their secretary and graphic designer. So so she does end up getting kind of a little job because of it, and but she is just very bored and very like, she's not handcuffed really anymore after the first 3 years, but she can't leave, and so she thinks of it as kind of a little family, which is to me very sad. And she had, because other when he doesn't abuse her, she thinks of Philip as very nice, and she thinks of Nancy as very nice, and she doesn't want them, or doesn't want to do anything to make them mad or do anything. So and throughout the time, she does lose her sort of identity in herself. She no longer goes by JC, but by Alyssa. And she does end up going into town a lot on outings with Philip and Nancy, and that is how she is named to people. Is she's referred to as Alyssa. And so this happens for, again, 18 years. I think her first daughter must have been born in 94, and then her second daughter, I think, was born in 97. So this is still like 11 or 12 years later. So and then while her children were there, it all seemed, JC was kind of known to them as their older sister, and it was just kind of like Philip was their father, obviously, but Nancy was their mother to them. So it was very confusing for them, I imagine. And one of the things that I wondered was that she kind of had, like I said, she kind of had sympathy. So I don't know if I want to exactly call it Stockholm Syndrome, kind of with what Patty Hearst had, where she felt compassion and felt sympathetic for her captors. But it kind of reminded me of that, where she was afraid that if Philip was gone, she was afraid that he would never come back. And she was afraid, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my children? So she kind of relied on him greatly for that. So, and then, so this goes on, and Philip is, again, like I said, he's a sex offender, so he's visited many times by a parole officer who sometimes the parole officer sees her and her daughters, and which always I wondered about that, like, why didn't she tell anybody who she was, or why didn't anybody notice why this man has these kids or these other people with him. But then there's a time that they say in August 24th or August 25th, and they're referring to in 2009 because that's when she was discovered. What happened was on August 24th of 2009, Philip had to report to court for a parole hearing and meet with his parole officer, because I think he was getting a new one. And and so the parole officer was saying, okay, come back the next day, which was August 25th. And so Philip did, and he brought everybody with him. And the parole officer was like, why are you bringing your family with you? Why are you bringing this girl and these other two little girls with you? And so they were taken into a separate room, and this lady was talking to Jaycee for a long time, and Jaycee was just very afraid because she's like, what do I say? Because Philip usually told her what to tell people, and he wasn't there, so she was very afraid and very lost. And so finally she was able to talk to the lady and talk to the police officers, and finally others came in that had talked to Philip before, and they're like, well, you're lying, because Jaycee had told people that the girls that she was with were not hers, they were her sisters. And they're like, well, no, you're lying, those are your children. And she's like, no, and they're like, no, Philip has told us, he's confessed. Who are you? You're wrong, your name is completely wrong. And one of the things that I felt was very powerful was that she couldn't say her real name anymore because she felt that she lost her identity. So she ended up writing it down. She wrote down Jaycee Dugard, and everybody was so excited because they found her. And then she was able to be reunited with her mother, and that reunited feeling was very good for her. And she was able to finally meet her sister again, who was like 19 at the time. So and her sister knew about her but never remembered her, since again she was 18 months when Jaycee was taken. So I thought it was a very powerful book and very good. They do also talk about that while she was being under captive, Philip was very unstable, obviously, but he also suffered very mental health wise. They said that he was bipolar, manic depressive, schizophrenic. He was afraid that everybody was against him, and that and he kind of ran, I would imagine, a cult, kind of, because Jaycee was talking that he became very quote-unquote religious, where he was reading the Bible, but I was trying to decipher through that, because I could tell she was not very religious herself, and that he would tell her that God wanted, or that there were angels all around, and angels were telling him to do these bad things, and angels were telling other people who also did bad things. And so that's why I'm thinking, okay, wait, this is not like kind of normal religion type beliefs. So that was interesting to read about. And Philip was also an avid drug user. He used meth, which I thought was kind of fun because I just read a book about meth. So I liked that little tie-in. And so that helped feed his first of all, it helped feed his sexual drive. And so he often called it going on runs, where I think that would be where he would be awake for days, because that's what meth does. And that would be where he would want to have all this sex with her. Luckily, as I said, as it got longer in time, he was trying to get clean, so his runs were less and less, so she was getting abused less and less. So that's it. Again, I thought that it was a very good book. And the next book I'm going to read is another Stephen King book. It is called Bag of Bones. I read this one, so this could be interesting. And that's it. And I bid you fond farewell and happy reading.